It was a chilly evening, the kind where the wind carried a subtle bite that made even seasoned officers like Detective James Harper zip their jackets a little tighter. The streetlights buzzed faintly, casting a dim glow on the quiet suburban road. Harper had been patrolling this stretch for years, though his heart hadn't been in it lately. After losing his son, Ethan, 3 years ago, everything felt like it moved in slow motion. Each day felt like a hollow replay of the last, his once steadfast dedication to the badge now weighed down by a grief he couldn't escape. As he rounded the corner of Maple Avenue, Harper noticed a figure walking alone on the sidewalk. A teenage boy, hoodie pulled up against the wind, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. There was nothing particularly alarming about him. No furtive glances or unusual behavior, but something about the way he moved caught Harper's eye. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it tugged at a long-dormant instinct inside him. Harper slowed his cruiser, rolling to a stop a few yards ahead of the boy. Stepping out, he called, "Hey kid, you got a minute?" His voice was calm, professional, but there was an undertone of something he couldn't quite name. The boy turned, and for a moment, Harper felt the ground shift beneath him. The light from the street lamp illuminated the boy's face, and Harper's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just some random kid, he looked like Ethan. The same dark eyes, the same sharp jawline, even the way his hair fell across his forehead. It was uncanny, like staring at a ghost from a past he couldn't let go of. "Is there a problem, officer?" the boy asked, his voice steady but guarded. He looked Harper up and down, clearly unsure of what this was about. Harper hesitated, his mind racing. "No problem, just doing my rounds. Haven't seen you around here before. What's your name?" The boy shifted uneasily, glancing at the ground. "It's Jason," he said after a moment. "Jason," Harper repeated, the name tasting foreign but familiar on his tongue. "Where you headed this late?" Jason shrugged, his hands still buried in his pockets. "Just walking. Needed some air." Harper nodded, though his eyes never left the boy's face. There was something there, something he couldn't put his finger on. "Mind if I ask where you're from? You live around here?" Jason hesitated again, and Harper caught a flicker of something in his expression. Fear, uncertainty. "Just passing through," Jason muttered, taking a small step back. Harper noticed the movement and raised a calming hand. "Relax, kid. I'm not accusing you of anything. It's just, you remind me of someone." He didn't elaborate, and Jason didn't ask. That's when Harper's eyes drifted to the chain around the boy's neck. A simple silver necklace, glinting faintly in the streetlight. Hanging from it was a small, familiar pendant, a worn locket, the exact kind Harper had given Ethan on his 16th birthday. His pulse quickened, and his chest tightened as a flood of memories washed over him. He took a step closer, his voice trembling. "Where'd you get that necklace?" Harper asked, his tone sharper now, the calm professionalism slipping away. Jason instinctively clutched the pendant, his face hardening. "It was my dad's," he said firmly. "Why?" But Harper wasn't listening anymore. His mind was spinning, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't even know existed. That necklace. There was no way it could be here on this boy unless... "Your dad," Harper said slowly, forcing his voice to steady. "What was his name?" Jason's brows furrowed, his eyes narrowing as he took another step back. "Why does it matter?" "Just tell me," Harper pressed, his tone more urgent now. "Please." Jason hesitated, his gaze flickering between Harper and the police cruiser. Finally, he muttered, "His name was Ethan." Harper felt the world tilt, his breath catching as the name hung in the air. His son's name. His heart raced as he stared at the boy, who now looked back with a mix of confusion and defiance. Before Harper could say another word, Jason turned and bolted, disappearing into the shadows. Harper stood frozen, the weight of what just happened crashing down on him. The boy looked like Ethan. He had Ethan's necklace, and now he was gone. Without thinking, Harper scrambled back into his cruiser, his hands shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. Questions swirled in his mind, each one louder than the last. Who was Jason? How did he have that necklace? And why did he look so much like the son Harper had lost? The engine roared to life, and Harper sped off into the night, determined to find answers. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever he was about to uncover would change everything. The cruiser's tires screeched as Harper took a sharp turn, his heart pounding louder than the engine. The boy's face, the name, the necklace. It all felt like a cruel trick his mind was playing on him, but the locket was real. He'd seen it up close, the unmistakable scratches and scuffs on its surface etched into his memory. It was impossible to ignore, no matter how much he tried to convince himself otherwise. Harper scanned the dim-lit streets, his headlights cutting through the darkness. Jason couldn't have gotten far, not on foot. The boy had vanished into a cluster of alleyways ahead, and Harper slowed, his eyes darting from one shadow to the next. His grip tightened on the wheel as he tried to piece together what had just happened. The way Jason reacted, clutching the necklace like it held a secret, stuck in Harper's mind. Why had he run? And what connection could he possibly have to Ethan? The radio crackled softly, breaking the tense silence in the car. Harper reached out to turn it down, his focus laser-sharp on the road. He couldn't call this in, not yet. How would he even explain it? I stopped a kid who looks like my dead son and has his necklace. No, this was something he needed to handle on his own, at least for now. He parked near the entrance of the alleyway and stepped out, the chill biting harder now. The wind carried faint noises, rustling leaves, distant traffic, but nothing that gave away Jason's location. Harper moved cautiously, his boots crunching softly against the pavement as he ventured deeper into the maze of narrow passages. His flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating brick walls, dumpsters, and the occasional scurry of a stray cat. As he searched, fragments of his past flickered in his mind. Ethan had been wearing that necklace the day he died. Harper had given it to him for his birthday, a simple gift, but one that meant the world to his son. "It's for luck," Harper had told him, clasping it around Ethan's neck, "to keep you safe no matter where you go." But it hadn't been enough. Harper had failed to protect him, and that failure haunted him every day. He shook the memories away, focusing on the task at hand. Jason wasn't here, at least not in the stretch of the alley. Harper's frustration bubbled to the surface as he doubled back to his car. Sitting inside, he drummed his fingers against the steering wheel, his mind racing. If Jason wasn't hiding nearby, he had to have a destination in mind. But where? And why? Harper decided to try something different. Pulling out his phone, he opened the police database and entered the name Jason along with a description of the boy. Maybe there was a record, anything that could give him a lead. The screen loaded slowly, each passing second stretching his patience. Finally, a single result popped up. Jason Miller, age 16. No known address. Reported missing 6 months ago. Harper stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. Missing? That didn't make sense. The boy had looked healthy, well-fed, not like someone living on the streets for half a year. And if he had no address, where had he gone all this time? Harper scrolled further, finding a few sparse details about the case. Jason's father had passed away years ago, and his mother had reported him missing after a heated argument. There were no signs of foul play, and the investigation had gone cold after a few weeks. Harper leaned back in his seat, the pieces of the puzzle scattering further apart. If Jason had been missing, how did he end up here? And what was he doing with Ethan's necklace? The questions kept piling up, but answers remained frustratingly out of reach. As he sat there, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Across the street, a figure darted out from behind a row of parked cars. Harper's pulse quickened. It was Jason. The boy glanced over his shoulder, his hood falling back for a brief moment before he disappeared around another corner. Harper didn't think twice. He threw the car into gear and sped across the street, pulling up just in time to see Jason slipping through a gap in a chain-link fence. Harper jumped out, the cold air stinging his face as he ran toward the fence. The gap was narrow, but he managed to squeeze through, his flashlight sweeping the area ahead. He was in an old industrial yard now, the remnants of abandoned buildings looming like shadows against the night sky. The air smelled of rust and damp concrete, and Harper's footsteps echoed eerily in the emptiness. "Jason," he called out, his voice firm but not angry. "I just want to talk." For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, faintly, he heard a voice. "Go away." It was Jason, his tone laced with defiance but also fear. "I'm not here to hurt you," Harper said, moving closer to where the sound had come from. "I just need to know the truth. About the necklace. About your dad." There was a pause, and Harper could feel the tension in the air. Finally, Jason stepped out from behind a stack of rusted metal beams, his shoulders squared but his eyes wary. The necklace was still clutched in his hand, the silver glinting faintly in the moonlight. "I told you," Jason said, his voice trembling slightly. "It was my dad's. He gave it to me before he died." Harper took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "Jason, that necklace, it belonged to my son. I gave it to him years ago. He died 3 years ago. So please, tell me the truth. How did you get it?" Jason's expression faltered, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. "You're lying," he said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "I'm not," Harper said gently. I know what I saw. And I know you're scared, but I need you to trust me. Just tell me the truth." Jason looked down at the locket, his fingers running over its surface. For a moment, he seemed to wrestle with something, his jaw tightening as he fought back whatever emotions were threatening to break through. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I found it," he said, "in an old box. It wasn't a place my dad used to go. I didn't know it belonged to anyone else." Harper frowned, his mind racing. An old box. A place Jason's father used to go. The pieces still didn't fit, but it was clear the boy wasn't lying, or at least he believed what he was saying. "Where was this place?" Harper asked. Jason hesitated, his eyes darting toward the exit. "It doesn't matter," he muttered, taking a step back. "It does," Harper said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Jason, I'm not going to hurt you. I just need to understand. Please." Jason looked at him for a long moment, his eyes searching Harper's face as if trying to decide whether he could be trusted. Finally, he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "It was an old storage unit," he admitted. "My dad used to take me there when I was little. I found the necklace in one of the boxes after he was gone." Harper nodded, his mind already working. "Can you show me where it is?" he asked. Jason hesitated again, but eventually gave a small nod. "I guess," he said quietly. Harper felt a strange mix of relief and dread as he followed Jason out of the yard. The mystery was far from solved, but he was one step closer to the truth. Whatever that truth might be. Jason led Harper through a series of winding streets, the boy walking quickly but silently, his hands stuffed deep into the pockets of his hoodie. The night seemed colder now, the air heavy with anticipation. Harper kept a few steps behind, his flashlight bobbing slightly as they made their way into a part of town he hadn't been to in years. The streets were lined with rundown warehouses and empty lots, the remnants of a once thriving industrial district now reduced to decay and abandonment. The boy didn't say a word and Harper didn't push him to talk. He could sense the tension radiating off Jason, the way his shoulders stayed hunched and his head dipped low. Harper's mind churned with unanswered questions. Why would Ethan's necklace be in some storage unit? And what connection could Jason's father possibly have to it? Every theory Harper came up with felt more improbable than the last, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the verge of something big, something that might finally explain the unexplainable. Finally, Jason stopped in front of a chain-link fence that surrounded a row of dilapidated storage units. Most of them looked like they hadn't been touched in years, their metal doors streaked with rust and graffiti. Jason hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at Harper before reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small key. "It's this one," Jason said quietly, nodding toward the third unit in the row. He stepped forward and unlocked the padlock, the faint squeak of the key turning in the rusted lock breaking the silence. Harper followed him inside, the beam of his flashlight sweeping across the space. It was cramped and cluttered, filled with dusty boxes, old furniture, and what looked like remnants of a life long forgotten. Jason moved to a corner and knelt down, opening one of the boxes. He pulled out a small stack of papers and handed them to Harper without a word. Harper took the papers, squinting at them in the dim light. They were faded and yellowed with age, but as he flipped through them, he realized they were receipts, letters, and photographs. One photo in particular made his heart skip a beat. It was of Ethan, no older than 8, standing next to a man Harper didn't recognize. The man had a kind face, his arm draped casually around Ethan's shoulders, and they both smiled like they'd known each other forever. "What is this?" Harper asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason sat back on his heels, his expression unreadable. "I found that photo here," he said. "I don't know who that man is, but my dad used to talk about him sometimes. He called him James." Harper's grip on the photo tightened as a chill ran down his spine. The name hit him like a freight train. James, his own name. Was it a coincidence, or was there something deeper, something he didn't yet understand? He flipped through more of the papers, his eyes scanning for anything that might make sense of this. One letter stood out, written in neat, deliberate handwriting. It was addressed to James Harper and dated more than 10 years ago. Harper unfolded the letter, his hands trembling slightly as he read. "James, I don't know if you'll ever see this, but I need you to know the truth. I couldn't protect him like you could. I thought keeping him away would keep him safe, but now I realize I was wrong. If you ever find this, please forgive me. I did what I thought was best." The letter ended abruptly, with no signature, but Harper's mind was already racing. The words didn't make sense, but the emotion behind them was clear: guilt, regret, and something else he couldn't quite name. He He read the letter again, his eyes lingering on the phrase, "I couldn't protect him like you could." "Where did this come from?" Harper asked, holding up the letter. Jason shrugged, his gaze fixed on the ground. "It was just here," he said. "I found it a few weeks ago when I was looking through the boxes. I don't know who wrote it or what it's about." Harper stared at the letter, his thoughts spinning. He had no memory of this man, no recollection of Ethan ever mentioning him. But the photograph, the necklace, the letter, they all pointed to a connection he couldn't ignore. And the more he thought about it, the more he felt like he was standing on the edge of a revelation that would change everything. As he sifted through the rest of the papers, Harper noticed a small, locked box tucked away in the corner. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands. "Do you know what's in this?" he asked Jason. Jason shook his head. "I tried to open it, but I couldn't. It doesn't have a key." Harper examined the box more closely. It was old and heavy, with a simple latch that looked like it could be pried open with the right tool. He decided to take it with him, feeling like whatever was inside might hold the answers he was looking for. As they stepped out of the storage unit, the cold night air hit them like a wall. Harper locked the unit behind them, his mind still racing. Jason walked a few steps ahead, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Jason," Harper said after a long silence, his voice softer now, "why didn't you tell anyone about this place before?" Jason hesitated, his steps slowing. "I didn't think anyone would care," he said finally. "And I didn't want to lose it. It's all I have left of my dad." Harper felt a pang of sympathy for the boy. He knew what it was like to cling to the past, to hold on to the pieces of someone you'd lost because letting go felt like losing them all over again. "Thank you for showing me," Harper said. "I know it wasn't easy." Jason didn't respond, but he gave a small nod, his gaze fixed on the ground. As they made their way back to the car, Harper's mind churned with possibilities. Who was the man in the photograph? Why did he have Ethan's necklace? And what did the letter mean? The answers felt just out of reach, tantalizing but elusive. Harper started the car, the engine rumbling softly as they pulled away from the storage unit. He glanced at Jason, who sat quietly in the passenger seat, his expression unreadable. Harper didn't know where this road was leading, but he was determined to follow it, no matter how dark or twisted it might become. As the car rolled through the empty streets, Harper's grip on the steering wheel tightened. The lockbox sat on the center console, its weight seeming to grow heavier with every mile. Jason was silent beside him, his face pale and drawn. The boy had led him into a world Harper hadn't expected, a world filled with fragments of the past that didn't fit into any logical frame he could build. The letter repeated itself in Harper's mind, each word echoing with a haunting clarity. "I couldn't protect him like you could." What had this mysterious man meant? And how did he know Ethan? Harper glanced at Jason, who stared out the window, lost in his own thoughts. The boy's presence felt like a tether between the past and the present, a link that Harper couldn't sever no matter how much he tried to reason his way out of it. "Jason," Harper said, his voice cutting through the quiet hum of the engine. "Did your dad ever mention someone named Ethan?" Jason hesitated, his brow furrowing. "Not really," he said finally. "He didn't talk about people much. He mostly talked about places he'd been, things he'd seen. I think he wanted me to know what kind of life he had before everything changed." Harper nodded slowly, the boy's words adding another layer of mystery to the puzzle. He pulled the car into his driveway and shut off the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening. Jason followed him inside, their footsteps echoing softly in the stillness of the house. Harper set the lockbox on the kitchen table and grabbed a small toolkit from a drawer. As he worked on the box, Jason wandered around the living room, his eyes scanning the photos on the walls. He stopped in front of a framed picture of Ethan, his fingers brushing the edge of the frame. "This is him, isn't it?" he asked quietly. Harper looked up from the box, his heart tightening at the sight of Jason standing there. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's Ethan." Jason nodded, his gaze lingering on the photo. "He looks happy," he said, his voice tinged with something Harper couldn't quite place. "He was," Harper replied, his throat tightening. He had a way of making everyone around him feel like they mattered. Jason didn't say anything else, but Harper could see the wheels turning in the boy's mind. It was like he was trying to piece together his own connection to this stranger who had suddenly become so important. With a soft click, the lock on the box gave way, and Harper lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of items. A small journal, a handful of old photographs, and a few other trinkets that looked like they held sentimental value. Harper reached for the journal first, flipping through its pages. The handwriting was neat and deliberate, each entry dated and signed with a single initial, J. The entries painted a picture of a man struggling with regret and longing. They spoke of a life filled with choices he wasn't proud of, but also of moments he cherished deeply. One passage caught Harper's attention immediately. "I saw him again today. He doesn't know who I am, and that's how it has to stay. James doesn't need me complicating his life, and Ethan deserves better than the mess I've made. But I can't help feeling like I'm doing something right, just by watching over him from a distance." Harper's hands trembled as he read the words. The man in the journal had been watching Ethan, protecting him in a way without ever stepping into his life. But why? And what connection did he have to Harper himself? The photographs in the box offered more clues. One showed the man, Jason's father, Harper assumed, standing with Ethan in a park. Another showed the same man with Harper's ex-wife, their faces lit with the kind of joy that spoke of a history Harper hadn't been privy to. The pieces were starting to fit together, but the picture they formed was one Harper hadn't been prepared to see. "Jason," Harper said, his voice tight. "Did your dad ever talk about me? About my family?" Jason looked up from where he was sitting, his expression worried. "No," he said slowly, "but he did talk about someone he cared about. Someone he said he let down. I think that's why he was always so protective of me. He didn't want to make the same mistakes." Harper's chest tightened, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. If Jason's father had been watching Ethan, if he'd been close to Harper's family in some way, then everything, Ethan's death, the necklace, the journal, might be connected in ways Harper couldn't yet comprehend. The journal's final entries were the most cryptic, filled with references to a plan and a choice that had cost the man everything. Harper read the words over and over, his mind racing with possibilities. He could feel the tension building, the answers tantalizingly close but just out of reach. Suddenly, Jason's voice broke the silence. "What are you going to do with all this?" he asked, nodding toward the journal and photographs. Harper looked at him, the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I need to find out the truth. About your dad, about Ethan, about everything." Jason nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of trust and uncertainty. Harper could see the boy was struggling too, caught between loyalty to his father's memory and a need for answers. They were both searching, both driven by a shared loss that had brought them together in the most unexpected way. As the night stretched on, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something life-changing. The journal, the photographs, the necklace, they were all pieces of a story that had been hidden for years. And now, as the tension reached its peak, Harper knew they were closer than ever to the truth. But with every answer they found, more questions seemed to emerge, pulling them deeper into the mystery. Harper sat at the kitchen table long after Jason had fallen asleep on the couch, the journal open in front of him. The house was silent except for the ticking of a clock on the wall, but Harper's mind was anything but still. Every page of the journal, every photograph, every word written by a man he'd never met seemed to pull him further into a story he hadn't known he was part of. There was a familiarity to it all that he couldn't explain, as though the pieces were connected by a thread he could barely grasp. He thumbed through the journal again, pausing on an entry he'd skimmed earlier. It mentioned a place, a remote cabin tucked deep in the woods outside town. The words were vague, but there was a sense of urgency in them, a suggestion that this cabin held something important. Harper's stomach twisted as he considered the possibility. Could this cabin be the key to unraveling the mystery? And if so, what would he find there? Unable to shake the thought, Harper glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight, but the idea of waiting until morning felt impossible. He stood, grabbing the journal and a flashlight, before heading toward the couch. Jason stood as Harper approached, his eyes fluttering open. "Hey," Harper said softly. "I found something in the journal. I think we need to check it out." Jason blinked, groggy but alert enough to catch the seriousness in Harper's tone. "Now?" he asked, sitting up. "Yeah," Harper said. "There's a place mentioned in here. A cabin. I think it might have answers." Jason hesitated, his expression uncertain, but he nodded. "Okay," he said, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Let's go." The drive out of town was quiet, the road winding through dark, forested hills. Jason stared out the window, his thoughts clearly elsewhere, while Harper kept his focus on the road. The journal sat on the passenger seat, its pages dog-eared and marked with hasty notes Harper had made. The cabin's location was vague, described only as being near an old logging trail that Harper barely remembered from years ago. As they drove deeper into the woods, the air seemed to grow colder, the trees closing in around them like silent sentinels. The sense of unease that had been building all night reached a crescendo when Harper finally spotted the overgrown path that matched the description in the journal. He pulled the car to a stop and killed the engine, the sudden quiet amplifying the sound of their breathing. "This is it," Harper said, glancing at Jason. The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. They stepped out of the car, their breath visible in the chilly air. Harper led the way, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness as they followed the trail. The woods were eerily silent, the usual sounds of nocturnal wildlife conspicuously absent. Harper's grip on the flashlight tightened as they rounded a bend and saw the faint outline of a cabin in the distance. The structure was small and weathered, its wooden planks gray with age. The windows were dark, and the door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the breeze. Harper's heart pounded as they approached, every instinct telling him to turn back even as he pressed forward. He pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The cabin's interior was sparse, with a single table, a few chairs, and a cold, empty fireplace. Dust covered every surface, and cobwebs hung in the corners, but it was clear the space had been used recently. A pile of papers sat on the table, along with a small, locked chest that looked similar to the one they'd found in the storage unit. Harper's eyes were immediately drawn to the papers, and he crossed the room to examine them. The first thing he saw was a map, marked with several red X's, including one that seemed to indicate their current location. Beside the map was a stack of documents, letters, receipts, and photographs, much like the ones in the storage unit. But one photograph stopped Harper cold. It was of Ethan, but this time he wasn't alone. Jason's father stood beside him, and they both held the same necklace. "What is this?" Jason asked, his voice trembling as he stepped closer. "I don't know," Harper said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's starting to feel like your dad was involved in something much bigger than we realized." As Harper sifted through the documents, one stood out, a letter written in the same handwriting as the journal. It mentioned a meeting and proof that needed to be hidden. The words were cryptic, but Harper felt a chill run down his spine as he read them. The letter also referenced another name, Carter. Harper's stomach dropped. Carter was the name of the officer who had led the investigation into Ethan's death. Before Harper could process the implications, a sound from outside froze them both. It was faint at first, like the crunch of leaves underfoot, but it grew louder, more deliberate. Harper exchanged a glance with Jason, his pulse racing. "Stay here," he whispered, motioning for Jason to move toward the corner of the room. Harper grabbed a heavy piece of wood from the floor and moved to the door, his flashlight off to avoid drawing attention. The sound grew closer, and Harper felt his breath catch as a shadow moved past the window. He swung the door open, stepping out into the night with the makeshift weapon raised. The forest seemed to swallow the sound of his movements, but the shadow was gone. Harper scanned the area, his heart pounding in his chest. Whoever, or whatever, had been outside was no longer visible. When he turned back toward the cabin, he saw Jason standing in the doorway, his face pale and his eyes wide. "There's something else?" Jason said, his voice shaking. "It's in the chest." Harper stepped back inside, his nerves frayed as he approached the locked chest. With a swift motion, he pried it open, the old lock giving way easily. Inside was a stack of files and a small audio recorder. Harper grabbed the recorder, his hands trembling as he pressed play. A voice crackled to life, deep and steady, unmistakably Jason's father. "If you're hearing this," the voice began, "then it means I've run out of time. What you're about to learn will change everything." The recording cut off abruptly, leaving them in stunned silence. Harper and Jason exchanged a look, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Whatever secrets the recording held, they were about to step into a world far more dangerous than either of them had imagined.